can't really.
Call the meeting to order. Welcome to our work session. Today you may remember that we are going to revisit the budget. We went over it last week publicly and then in a little bit greater detail. So today is the opportunity for anybody who had additional questions, wanted clarification. You're not hearing me? I feel like I'm echoing. Any additional questions or clarifications that were needed. And I don't, Todd, did we get any questions from the public at all?
No.
No. So no feedback, no questions, concerns. Does anybody who presented last week have anything they'd like to add?
I just say that the budget is the tax-supported budget, which is kind of the biggest part of our budget by far. Is before you there, the general fund at $231 million. The special ed fund at $65 million, capital outlay fund at $38 million. Some of that is reserves for future projects. And then the bond redemption fund, which pays off the 2018 bond referendum, or is paying that off, is at $12.2 million. Thanks.
And then just for clarification, last meeting we also presented the MOU with the teachers, and that's all built into this budget going forward.
Yeah, the cost of the MOU is in this budget. Yes.
Anything else to discuss budget related? No? Okay. Okay. Yep,
so moving on, we have kind of a stack of things within facility planning, and we're going to go through quite a bit of information, but this isn't the only time that we'll be reviewing this information, just for those who are interested. So if people have questions after this or during our process. So some of this, most of it really has been in motion kind of in one way or the other for quite a while. We know that we have some programmatic decisions that we'll need to make, which then impact boundary decisions that will come to the board for a vote. And so I think it's important to kind of distinguish between those two things, but yet they're coupled up together. The board votes on the boundary part of that. In order to make those decisions about program that results also in some boundary decisions, we've done quite a bit of work to get feedback. We've had a lot of good feedback come in through Let's Talk. Dr. Nold and Dr. Boyson have been out doing listening sessions in a number of locations to hear from families, parents, teachers, staff, which has been really good. And so we're going to review that, and we're also going to look at some other related updates, as well as part of our facility planning, our continued work to really lock in on the site plan for Whittier, and then a resulting timeline. So there's going to be quite a bit of information that we'll go through here, and we can stop anywhere we want to along the way and ask questions. We do have public comments after the information for 3A, and so we'll allow for time for that. But I just want to be clear that none of this is really new. It's all really good things, because our programs have grown for Spanish immersion, and Whittier, a projected rebuild of Whittier, has been part of our facility plan for a long time, but moving that along now and attaching a firmer timeline to it is what's really important. So anything to add to that, Dr. Knoll, Dr. Boyson, or Jeff? Otherwise, I'll turn it over, and we're just going to kind of progress through the information. And like I said, we can stop at any point if we want to have some discussion or ask some questions.
So I will start out here, and as Dr. Stamen said, we'll be happy to answer questions as we're going. Really, we're looking at some type of a culmination in June to put some final touches on some of these things so that we can put things in motion for what would be a deadline date of December 1st, which was when open enrollment starts. So a lot of these plans as we're going through would be that in mark December 1st, but tentatively planning to have those things approved, whatever that plan would ultimately end up being in that June timeframe. Yep.
I hit my button. Just clarify that again, because I
Yep.
think that's one thing. We're making some of these decisions by the time we kind of come to the end of this fiscal year. You referenced open enrollment, so just go through the timing of when these actually go into motion related to open enrollment.
So each of these initial proposals, and as part of the process with the administrative team to put together an initial proposal to the school board, and we brought that proposal forward last time. You'd heard that at the work session and some of that information. Then we went out and did share information in feedback sessions and had that with the various locations depending on what the area was that would be impacted. And so we'll talk about that as we go through and just give you a little bit of an insight today on some of the things that came from those feedback sessions, but did explain that at each of those sessions that we really started with, okay, most of this would be impacted with the start date of the fall of 2025. And especially with the new elementary opening and other things that would be impacted at that same time. So anytime you're looking at something that'll start in the fall of 2025 or whatever year that is, you back up to December 1st. Because if somebody does have a wish to be in a different location with their child, especially if it's a boundary change or a school change or something of that nature, they need to know that prior to December 1st, because that's when we were impacted by open enrollment. And we always give those individuals, so if the board were to approve that we would grandfather certain groups in, they need to know that before, matter of fact, well before. So we're looking more into August, September, so that we can send out notifications. And we did that with the boundary changes when we were impacted with Ben Rifle Middle School and the opening there and the changes that took place. And we send out hundreds of letters in that area. It also impacted when we had Renberg and some of the changes there in the open enrollment and some of those that we heard from in the feedback sessions. Truly, that was able to resolve any of their concerns. Same way with Jefferson in that whole process. So we look at December 1st because that's when open enrollment. We have to send out notifications well before that to see if they're going to opt to go to the new attendance center or stay in the previous one, and that's their options with the grandfathering or open enrollment. And so we usually try to do that in that September timeframe to give them a deadline of, November that they have to respond back. Then we send out, encouragements again to be able to complete that process if they're interested. Otherwise, they'll go back into the normal pool just like open enrollment would. So we look at December 1st and back up off of that and be able to plan to get things ready. We look at June to try to get some type of a final plan in place. But if it can't be decided by June, we do have a little bit of wiggle room in there that we could work with. So most of this is putting forward a plan. Will you be informed last month at the work session, this month at the work session, the next month, and going all the way through until finally there would be an approval that would come in a form of a vote by the board members at a regular board meeting. Questions on that timeline planning? And so today it's really just to be able to go through part of it in a little bit more depth to give feedback. And each time will be that same way, and we'll make some adjustments to some of these plans. And then as we go along, get your feedback as to what you would like to see as some of those approaches that we take.
I think one of my questions would be, you've gotten a lot of feedback. So from like today and May and June, at what point would you be presenting maybe an alternate plan based on the feedback that you've gotten?
A lot of that would probably come in the next work session.
Sure.
And so most everything that you'll see here, our plan would be to present some changes and then be able to allow people to give feedback on that as well.
Okay.
So as long as we can do that in the next work session, so this one being obviously April, May there would be one, and then we can have the same thing in June, and then probably at a board meeting later in June, have a final vote on it. So it allows for a couple more times to be able to do tweaks to that and allow people a month time in between there to get feedback so we can make plans and adjustments if need be.
That's what I was hoping. I didn't want it to be like you're taking feedback, but then in June, you're like, based on the feedback, here's what we're doing, and then you don't get to react to that.
You'll be tired of seeing some of this because you're going to see it for about 4 straight months and tweaks to it as well. And I think that's a whole part of the process that we've tried to be very open with it and to show people these are the tentative plans and initially lay those out there, because obviously we know the numbers and where the programs are, and we have to put out some initial things for people to be able to comment on. So that's our initial process that I believe is expected of us. And so we go through that whole process, and then now it goes out for the public comment so that you'll be informed and then can make those changes, see if you like those changes. If not, we'll tweak it a different direction. But so today's will really give you some highlights. It isn't going into all the detail. We'll get you some more of that as we go along, but some highlights of it. And then we talked about at the last session also Whittier. And moving forward, we gave you that timeline of Whittier. Well, one of the first steps in that, and Mr. Crido will go through that, is really selecting what will it look like as a layout, because that really gives us a lot of insight as to how we're going to plan moving forward and what some of those costs could be and what we'd need to do with that. So you'll see that, but you won't need to really vote on anything today. It's all going to be informational. And then we can move forward with the next one being probably even more in depth with some changes from some of the things that we've heard. So the purpose of it, as you can see, is really give you the updates, and we'll go through and do that. The first area was the new elementary. And so when we talk about that new elementary piece of it, we did go and just very quickly, if you remember where that's located at, right next to Ben Rifle Middle School, that was the area that was going to be impacted. So one of our first listening sessions was at that location. This one did not have a large turnout. There's 4 individuals that showed up to that listening and feedback session. And really the questions on that one were open enrollment. This area impacted Renberg, Hawthorne, and Hayward. And it was the new school, and that'll come to you later this month as far as the naming of that school. But really for people, open enrollment was a question. Will we have some type of an option of grandfathering? What would the busing look like in that? And so we talked about that with any open enrollments, there's no busing to the open enrolled site. It's always going to be to the home attendance center that's designated by the board for that school area, and it all depends on distances. And so that would still be to be determined because we don't know the exact boundaries yet. It hasn't been finalized. Once that's finalized, we can easily then set up what that busing would look like at this point in time. And so the questions were I mean, people are excited about having a new school. And obviously those that would be bused to Hawthorne, while there was good experiences there, now we're gonna have a school right in their neighborhood. And we knew that because Renberg was just growing at a rate faster than we were going to be able to build that elementary school. And so it impacts those 3, but this was really pretty straightforward. People are excited about the new school and the potential there. Questions on open enrollment and busing. So I would say for the most part, there was just questions where the lines were, not any debate on should they be moved or any input as far as should they be changed, anything to that nature.
And anything on Let's Talk aside from the in-person?
Very minimal.
We just had one student that attended, and he was very excited because he could ride his bike.
Oh,
yeah,
very cool.
Yeah. So I mean, everything on that was very minimal in nature and really positive.
Yep.
Just more specific questions on, do we still have an option to open enroll? If we keep our open enrollment for a couple more years with the one child, with the next one coming in, we want them at the new elementary, can they do that? And absolutely. So we were able to answer those. So that was the first area that we talked about last time at the work session. Mm-hmm. The next area we'll go into is the Spanish immersion.
Yep, the next area is Spanish immersion expansion for 2025. And again, that expansion is really looking at that middle school option, thank you, for at the two-way students as they enter middle school in 2025. We know that we need a bigger space because we'll have about 200 middle school students in that option, and one school can't hold all those students. So we talked through the different boundaries, and we looked at, this is the proposal, we looked at where families live, and we split the middle school sections, again, 3 middle schools on the west, 3 middle schools on the right, or the east, and really looked at where they would attend, and Ben Rifle and Edison. So 46% of our families live on the 3 west side middle schools, and 54% of our families in the Spanish immersion program live on the east side of those 3. So we went out Three of our listening sessions were Hayward, Rosa Parks, and Edison, and you can see the families that attended. We had 20 people at Hayward, 20 at Rosa Parks, and 50 at Edison. And then when we look at, again, that high level of feedback that we received between the listening sessions and Let's Talk, they really focused around, again, one of the main questions is open enrollment, but then siblings. And so if I have a child that's at Edison currently for middle school, and I have a sixth grader coming up in 2025, are you gonna split my family? And know that sibling preference, and then really trying to keep those siblings together. And then again, we talked through at those sessions, but there's not a legacy option. And a legacy would be 5 years ago, my other child went through Edison, so I want to go through. And then there'd be an open enrollment process if there's space available. And Dr. Nold spoke to that program. Spanish Immersion is a program, so then they look at that individually to see if there's space available in that. And then fee-based busing, that was a conversation at all three sites of how do we ensure that we have fee-based busing available for students, especially our two-way immersion students that would be coming from the west side of town into Edison, and making sure that they have access to the program, and that's available. And we said we'd work through that process. Maybe it's a centralized site for them to get picked up at Hayward and then come into Edison. And so that was conversations there. And then conversations around the interns. The interns are a great asset to our program, and a lot of conversations, would we continue that? Is there support for that? Currently, the district provides the interns at the kindergarten level, and Posse provides interns at the others, at the other levels, and it is important, and it great support for our classrooms, another native language speaker in that classroom, but also we talked to, when later you'll see staffing as a bullet point, how we've had interns, they're here for a year, they go back, and we hire them back as teachers. So it's a great training ground for our staff at Spanish Immersion. And then two-way immersion students, access to busing to middle school. I talked about that with the fee-based busing. Again, making sure that we have access so they can continue their programming, because that's part of the world language immersion umbrella, that it's a K-12 program. So to finish their program at 5th grade, they need an option to continue, and that option is the Spanish immersion. We've had a couple comments on, would we consider redrawing the middle school attendance line from that Minnesota Avenue to I-229? Just meaning if I live in the Patrick Henry area, it's closer distance to Edison than it is to Ben Rifle. So we've had a couple comments on that. So again, reoccurring theme, so that's put in here. Staffing, we talked about staffing, and that was a question from families. Can we continue to staff that Spanish immersion? And that's a good question. And we have seen the pool of applicants. It's increased, and the quality, we're back. You know, where a couple years ago, right after COVID, we had a harder time recruiting staff, but we see that increase, and all of our programs have interviewed, hired. We did have a couple withdraw just last week, but we have applicants now. A couple people walked in just last week and said, hey, I'm trained, I'm qualified. So we're anxious to interview them this week. And so we do see that staffing is currently a good option, and then interns are a good grow your own method. Curriculum, families concerned about curriculum. If my child goes to Ben Rifle, will they have the same curriculum at Edison? Yes. And that is, we have the same curriculum, it's the same program. High school locations, questions on that. We talked about families want to continue to go to Lincoln, and we talk about Lincoln can't hold all our Spanish immersion, so at that point we'll have to look at, is it 2 high schools, is it 4 high schools, and what that staffing looks like. We know we have the programming. It would, again, be the same programming, whether it's at 2 high schools or 4 high schools. Again, it would just be the staffing at that. And the timeline for that would be a decision, you know, they enter in 25, so spring of 26, we'd be having to have those conversations about what that middle school programming. After we see the numbers that continue on in middle school, that helps us to understand the number of high schools we can support. And designate, the question was, could we build a new middle school for Spanish immersion? And that'd be great if we had one middle school, but right now we know we have capacity in our current buildings, and so being fiscally responsible, making sure that we use our spaces that we currently have. Opportunities to mentor at an elementary currently, the students at Edison have an opportunity to mentor at Sonia, and so convenience for families, they can drop their students off at Sonia, they mentor with in a classroom, and then they walk over to that middle school. So is there an opportunity to replicate that at Ben Rifle? And blended students from both programs. So comments from parents is they appreciate the opportunity that we have that for students to blend, because of that rich heritage language that they're getting. Yesterday we had opportunity to have interns go to one of our two-way sites, and they commented that the level of Spanish, they were impressed because it was higher than what they felt like they were seeing. So just that opportunity for the students to talk and converse with other students that have that rich Spanish language is a great opportunity. And then again, we heard appreciation for all our Spanish immersion programs in the Sioux Falls School District. So those are our comments that have come through regarding Spanish immersion on Let's Talk and also in person. Dr. Nold, anything different?
And it was good discussions. Everybody's, and that's a great thing about the district, and you hear this in some of the other ones, everybody's very happy with the program their kids are in, and that's a great thing, and it's a compliment to the board, the teachers, the staff that work with them. Everybody loves and wants to keep it the same and have that program that they have. And, you know, with Sonia Sotomayor or at, you know, Rosa Parks or at Edison Middle School, but they all love the program they have and want to keep it the same with the same group of friends and kids that they've grown with. And so we heard quite a bit on that. Others were there and spoke a little bit about their children were some of the ones in the first groups that grew and expanded. But that's a big piece of it is how do we ensure the quality of the programming and a lot of those aspects. And so it was helpful. There was other individuals that gave some of the data and the results and the testing of the programs and how well they're doing across the board. So that part is a significant piece, but also just the sheer numbers coming up. One elementary can't hold that many sections. One middle school can't hold that many sections. And so just a conversation on what are some possible other solutions. And so that may be a piece we work on prior to the next time is what are some other things the board could look at to try to decide from there. And hopefully that information, well, not hopefully, that information will come to you in the next work session that we'd have.
I just had a quick question about, I know that a couple of years ago when we were just kind of talking about middle school, we had talked about a concern or a question, I should say, about if we stayed at just Edison, like what would our numbers be if the kids from Rosa had to get to Edison? Mm-hmm. And I think that we would lose a lot of people, right? Because it's a long ways for them to go, which is why Ben Rifle makes sense on the east side of town. So my question now would be the other way. Have we ever had a conversation with the families at Hayward and what their interest or willingness is to go to Edison instead of going to what would likely be George McGovern? Because I would hate to make a decision with the assumption that these 50 kids are going to come and then we find out that 25 of them want to just continue on to George McGovern. You know what I mean? So
we did have a conversation with families last October, a year ago October. We did listening sessions at Hayward and Rosa Parks. Well, actually, it was a World Cafe that we did at both sites, and really talking about their wishes and dreams and hopes and continuing on. And of course, just like all of us, we want to go to whatever is closest to my site. And if it's at George, I mean, they wanted it at George. Over on the east side, they wanted it at Ben. If we would have talked to families, if we had it at Patrick, you know, if it fed Patrick, they'd want it at Patrick or Memorial. And so that's what we heard last year when we talked, because we did talk to them because we knew that this was approaching, and so we wanted to get their feedback.
Yeah. And I think it's important to maybe even revisit that, only because when you're 2 years out from something, it's easy to say, oh yeah, I'm flexible and I want to go wherever it goes. But like when the decision is actually in front of you and you have to look at the way your life is structured, and that's true whether you're at Sonia or whether you're, I mean, it doesn't matter where you're at. When you're actually faced with making that decision, like, are you still going to commit? And we have people who don't go from Sonia to Edison. That's right down the street. They choose, to go wherever it is, whether it's private school or Harrisburg or wherever. So I would imagine the same thing would be true. So just trying to get a grasp of like, what would that number look like? So we have an idea of, I'd hate to move a bunch of kids out of Edison and then fill it with hardly any. I don't know.
And one aspect of that on a much smaller scale was with Rosa Parks, and even when the individual students were located at Harvey Dunn, transportation is the issue. And so once they were assured that transportation would be taken care of and they would be transported over to Rosa Parks to be able to maintain their status in the two-way immersion, I think there was only one student that ended up not going. All the rest of the families had their children go there. Now, Harvey Dunn is not as far a distance, when you compare that to Rosa Parks as compared to Hayward to Edison. I understand that, but that was the biggest question that came into that is, what will they do for transportation? And that's where we talked a little bit with that group that we would figure out some type of a, there's the fee-based busing, but some type of a busing system that would be subsidized or free based on income.
And then remind me, because I haven't had a kid who's ridden the bus for quite some time. When we were doing it, we had neighborhood stops if you had enough people. Is that still a thing, or is it all just elementary school pickups?
Both and. It depends, it could be an elementary if that's a closest proximity to where a collection of students are, or a neighborhood.
Just thinking if a lot of the kids are Hayward district students, then it would make,
that's what we talked about.
Hayward, pickup.
Get them to Hayward, we'll get them all on the bus and it'll be a straight shot right to Edison. So that way it'd be a, I don't want to say more convenient, but it's a smoother ride.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
And it should work out fairly well with the offset schedule times of the elementary start time compared to the middle school start time. But that was some of the feedback sessions where we're probably, look at some other things just so there's options to be involved. It was great input, and the great thing to hear is everybody loves the school that they're at and the way it's at, and wants to keep that exactly the way it is. And that's a compliment, but obviously it has grown from where all those programs have originally started, or even our high schools going from 3 to 4, from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. There's always been those changes, and that's what's offered more opportunities for individuals. But so those are the areas that we received quite a bit of feedback on through that process.
All right. Next area.
We did also step through in quite a bit of the information on the middle school planning, and the middle school process of that, as we talked about it, was Cleveland to Whittier. And so that change that would pull that Whittier elementary school into the Whittier. And some of the feedback we had when we go through the listening sessions, and you can see there outlined in red on both those. Currently, the Cleveland attends at Ben Rifle Middle School. And so in the proposed, they would move to the Whittier boundary area. Some of the things that we talked about that, because some had asked why, and it helps with the number of sections that you run. So number of teams, and it roughly takes somewhere around that 115 mark per team. Some thought we were talking athletics, and that is not what we're talking about. So to clarify, it's not about athletics. It's truly about the number of teams in 6th grade. There would be 3 teams of students, so 115 roughly each, and 330 students, total in 6th grade. And so it helps to run full teams instead of partials or half teams, especially with the staffing aspect of that. And so really looking to see how do we put those numbers back roughly up to that. What were some of the feedback pieces that we heard there is, there's 8 people that had attended. We explained to them that there'd be about 172, and that's where we heard again the appreciation for the listening sessions, because they felt like they were being heard, and the discussion was very good. questions about the open enrollment process again, because we originally had put in there that we would allow the grandfathering process, so they wanted to know how that works and would they be notified, and what happens if one of them is a 7th grader and the other one's a 6th grader, would the one then be forced to go to Ben Rifle and the other, be going, to the Whittier? And no, we keep families together, so we try to grandfather that process going through. The other part was changing back within the 3-year time period, and that's a legitimate, very good question. The number of housing units being built over in there, it is not filling some of that as fast as we thought, and some had moved out of that area with Whittier with the new apartments being built, and now we start to see some move back in some areas, but not necessarily in that area. The other part of it is they prefer always stay in the school that they're at. They love Ben Rifle. It's a brand new school, and we look at Whittier being a brand new school in about 5 years from now, roughly, in that 2030, in the fall of 2030. And so some questions on that, can it wait till the new school where there may be other options or offerings or things like that before they were moved? So those were some of the conversations we talked through, and we'll look at that again and bring back to see some recommendations at the next work session, some things that we could look at potentially on that. But their predominance was really at the new school site. They just moved into a new school, hate to lose that new school, which I get it, and that's why we're planning on some of the changes for Whittier. And then what would happen with the open enrollment process, that seemed to be a important topic, and quite a few were very pleased with that part and said that that would be at least an option they could consider if this did move forward in that process, and they would consider it that way. So that was the information that was really given back from the Cleveland to Whittier information sessions. Not a lot. We had a couple other Let's Talk that came in on that. It's really what would we provide the students there, at Whittier to be able to build that up. And I think those are discussions we're having as we start to look in the basic planning stages right now of Whittier, what could be there to provide other additional options and growth in the future at Whittier.
No, I'd agree. It was a great conversation. And again, they appreciate their school. They want to make sure that they had the same type of opportunities for their students at Whittier that they do at Ben Rifle, which again, our programming is the same. They have accelerated courses at all middle schools. At 8th grade, you can take biology, algebra, all of those. And so good conversations. And again, they appreciated the opportunity to have somebody listen and talk and provide feedback.
Questions you have on, any other questions you'd have maybe on the feedback sessions? We'll get more information for you, but we'll really try to build some things for the next work session, that we have some other plans and additional things to be able to introduce that to you.
So this seems like kind of a breaking point before we get into the
I would
Whittier.
agree.
So I don't know if do you want to give feedback now, or do you want to wait until this is done? You can do, you can.
I'm so sorry.
You can ask questions we just probably won't answer, but we can have somebody get back to you. Yeah, so
I do have.
we'll give you that, and then you get 5 minutes, 3 minutes? Okay, that's
Like
fine.
I've got a lot.
We know, Amy.
I can talk loud.
Or, do you want to stand at the podium?
There you go. Test.
We're just trying to capture it for.
Yeah. So just tell us your name and address, and then you can stand.
Yes, my name is Amy Kimber, and I live at 1600 South 4th Avenue here in Sioux Falls. I have 4 kids in the Spanish immersion program. I have a 7th grader, a 5th grader, a 2nd grader, and my youngest is in pre-K. So I will be greatly impacted by any changes you guys are making moving forward. I know I am one person, one family, but I do hope that you, in your decision-making process, I think you need to start thinking about the long-term plan, because I appreciate, and I don't want to take away the chance of people getting into the program, but by getting more and more people into the program, I want to maintain the integrity of the program, and it's an amazing experience. I tell my kids, this is your superpower. They don't know. They don't know that they're learning this language, and that, I'm not bilingual. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's an amazing experience. And You know, some of the things that you guys discussed up here were interns. Interns are a huge, huge.
Posse organization.
Just keep going. Okay. The posse organization, which you guys are well aware of, and this is a past president and a dear friend of mine who is sitting here, Susie Muntz, does a tremendous amount of work. This one died too, didn't it? Okay. For us so that we can have the interns. I think by adding the new elementary and Ben Rifle, you guys have to consider helping support Posse, support these interns, because the large majority of the fundraising that Posse does come from the Sonia Sotomayor School. And for us to have to support everybody else around the city, I mean, don't get me wrong, we are blessed to have this program in this landlocked state. Do you know what I mean? So, but you guys have to start figuring out the money to help support them, support the kids, to support the teachers, especially if this is where you guys are getting the teachers that you need. I mean, it's a win-win for us and you as a school district. I mean, and you guys did encapsulate most of everything that was I was at the Edison meeting, and I think it's important to, the two-way immersion is not gonna get split up. The Spanish immersion at Sonia Sotomayor is the one school that will get split up in your plan as it stands right now. The two-way immersion, one school would go to Edison, and Rosa Parks, like Hayward would go to Edison. Rosa Parks will end up at Ben Rifle based on geographic. So those kids are staying together. The plan that you have right now would break up the Sonia Sotomayor family, which is one thing that I think families are incredibly passionate about. I mean, being able to go from Sonia Sotomayor to Edison has been, I mean, for my son, wonderful. My daughter will go there next year. Anyway, I told you I was gonna have more than I needed to say.
Yeah. So the good news is that we'll just continue to have these conversations and people can continue to submit feedback on Let's Talk, and it will be continue to be reviewed by everybody. We will get those comments as well. So, and then like you mentioned, next month we'll be back with potentially some alternative options based on the feedback that we've received, and then we will hear more about that from people and see if they're palatable or if they're or if we're maybe closer to where people liked. And there's obviously going to be some things that just plain can't change, that we'll have to make do with or do the best that we can with. But there are other details that maybe are a little bit more flexible than others.
So I do agree, part of the conversation too was with the elementary schools and Sonia Sotomayor being one school currently, obviously as an elementary. And with that proposed plan, the initial proposed plan, that would go to 2 different sites depending on which half the city. The original boundary line we did put on would keep elementaries or middle schools together. And so it was based on the middle school process going through that. So that was one other area that was discussed in there, yes.
All right. You want to move on to Whittier? That's
yep. Cool. So one of the other topics that we'd presented on a month ago was the Whittier. And Whittier, we gave this timeline. So if you see the timeline there, the purchase property was part of the previous bond, finalized school site design, and Mr. Kreider will go through some of that, looking at the bond potentially in 2027 and begin construction 2028 with the opening in 2030. And again, Mr. Kreider will go through some of the different designs that would be there, give you a look at 3 different options on there and what that impacts in that community. And then you can, we'll possibly look at that as some type of a vote or decision made next month, but not this month. It's really just initial, so you can see that. And if there's any input that's given on that as feedback to us, we can take that into consideration and then bring something forward to you again next month. So again, most everything today is just informational based.
All right, I get to talk about Whittier again. So basically we're gonna go through the current status of property acquisitions that we have and 3 potential site locations. Location 1 would be between the school and football field. That was the original plan that we had. Location 2 would be, we looked at the Falls Park master plan and looked at maybe we might look at going west. We actually looked at one even further west, but with the amount of properties that you would have to acquire, we kind of set that to the side. And location 3 would be is take a look at it differently and see if we can make a more efficient site, utilizing maybe the football field as our potential school site, and then moving the football field instead of looking at keeping the football field. So we'll go through those three things, and
So I'm just going to clarify. So option 3 is kind of the newest iteration
yes.
of what we might want to consider. So original, possible, maybe more probable, but the whole question I think that has been part of this whole plan since its inception is how do we build on or near the existing site while knowing we're going to have to continue to acquire properties, and what does that look like, and what's the kind of the path of least resistance to get where we want to go, because the urgency of wanting to rebuild Whittier is upon us. And this has gone quickly, I think, and so I just want to make it clear that the third one isn't an iteration that you've seen previously.
That is correct. That's a brand new thought.
And I would just add, we will be continuing to educate students during the building process in the build rent. So it's not a demolition and then a start over. It's a process.
All 3 of those would keep kids being educated in the current Whittier while the other is being built. So all 3 will include that process.
We did discuss the potential, but then we couldn't find a solution. So
Yeah, the offsetting.
yes.
Just want to make that clear, because I think that's not something we've necessarily done. So.
Right. Okay, so we'll move on. This is Whittier site is on the bottom. You can see the Whittier and then the parking lot and the 2 blocks between the football field, and the colored renditions are, where we have the blues are rented, the light greens are properties that we've acquired. They're empty. We've removed the houses. One was removed because it was a habitat and they were building it. So they moved it before we purchased it. So then we cleared it the rest of the way. And the red is that it's not rented yet. So the other ones are all rented, and the purple we're under negotiations. I don't know if there's any movement on those 2 parcels now. We're close. So that's where we're at if you look at it. So there's several homes, and depending on which way we go, it'll depend on how many of those we acquire. And if we go to the west side, you'll see that, and you'll get a number of houses that we have to acquire and so forth. So with that, that's where we're at today. Then if you go to location 1, this would be, the blue would be what we would have to acquire, and the light green is what we own currently. Yes, this is the original CIP that they laid out. And so there's 21 houses in the 1 block and 1 church. The church is like a house. And then there's 18 in that other block. And there's an existing city park that we would have to look at how we would integrate with that. So the land is 9.4 acres existing, 10.2 new, give us 19.6 acres total. And you can see the total amount we would have to acquire. Did I just put that?
No, I was going to ask you a question.
Yeah.
So is 19.2, is there any recommendation by the state or any requirements?
No. Ben Rifle is about 21 acres. That was before we took the right-of-ways out. So it gives you, it's pretty close to what we would have in that parcel.
So, and that's entirely up to us.
When you looked at Memorial, we actually bought 14.5 acres, and then we had 30 acres with the parks, and Discovery was 10, and there was some sharing and moving around of those acres. So we're probably pretty close in all these scenarios. Okay, so when you take away the colors and movement, you can see what a building may look like on that site in relationship to the football field. Now, I want to tell you, when people talk about design, and I had to talk to Erica about this over the weekend, this is not a design. These are just kind of bubble diagrams that show what a square footage, and this shows what a 2-story building of a Ben Rifle size would be, and with the gyms and the commons and the library. And then we also put I put the George McGovern Boys and Girls Club on this corner, so we can do that as well, or plan for that. Whether that's part of this or in the future, that's yet to be determined. But we know it can fit, and we don't know if the design, once they get into the design will be very similar to what we did at Jefferson. We'll have a steering committee, we'll have design teams, we'll meet with staff, we'll go through that whole litany with this. So this could be a totally different layout, but it shows that it can be done within that footprint and how that would be. As you can see, there's probably more acreage than we need with that. See where Whittier, if we took Whittier out, that half of that block would not have to. It could be just an empty lot or given something or sold, or we could actually make a decision that move the east lot, sell that for houses, and then make the parking lot bigger into one parking lot. So those are things that we'll have to look at when we do the design and move forward. Okay, number 2, I think we showed you this several months ago. This would be going to the west, and this is kind of came about looking at, hey, we should look at the master plan of Falls Park and what that's going to be. Then with the convention center, or what did they call it? Proposed river. Yeah. And how they were thinking that. And this would put our front door on that road right to where that proposed development is, and coming and link it right to Falls Park. So it puts it in a little more prominent space. What it does is it increases the acreages, but it'll also allow some opportunities for that acreages, and we can talk about that. But it also requires 48 houses, and then there's an optional. See where that says optional, the 8 houses there. We can do this without buying those houses. We own about 3 of them already, so we just sell them if we choose to change that option. So then if you look at the layout of that parcel, you can see that the football field would just orientate differently. We would still acquire the property for the parks and maybe put a soccer field down there. And we could put enough parking on site. There's almost 3 split parking, one for the Boys and Girls Club and gym, and the commons for drop off, then the staff parking in the back. And you can see where that optional one is. You could actually consolidate some parking there if you wanted to, and then have a better loop, but you'd still have a loop around the building. So a lot of it works, but the whole Whittier site could be given to the city for something, or for other options. So it really makes that site, expendable if we had to. But it poses a lot of issues with how many houses you would need to buy and in a time frame. So, but it fits nicely. That the ground is a lot flatter there, so you wouldn't have some retaining walls and things you'd have to do. So it's a really pretty nice site. And I think I do have a clip. Did I get that in there? Did I? No. The one with that, maybe it's back farther. But number 3 is would be utilizing the property behind, but not buy the whole second, just buy half of that second block. And that on the Fairfax, on the right side of Fairfax, and close the 2 streets. And then this would actually build the building over the football field and relocate the football field, and we'll show that in a minute. But This gets you about 15.5 acres total, and it would bring the houses down to 29, and then the one church on the corner. Okay, and this is the potential how this would lay in there. So you would turn the building, it would, the building's main entrance would be on Indiana. And you would take that corner, and I haven't looked at if we can, link those two parking lots and have them together. There's something about me that says Fifth Avenue would be okay to keep for exiting and egress at the end of the day. But you would have to basically build a retaining wall along Fairfax and 6th Street, not build like it is today. It's up, it'll be down in that corner. But it certainly can be done, but along Indiana, it's pretty flat, so that would be good. Also thought you could maybe do a berm there and just have a natural football field where everybody sits on the side and watch that. But you can see how it fits in. I think it fits in pretty well. And this one would keep the park as is, so we wouldn't have to touch the park area.
And it also orients the entrance to the school still to the west.
Yep.
So it's still facing that kind of newly visioned downtown area. It's not a block down from there, but it still kind of points in that direction and is a nice profile. I think if you think about, as you kind of drive that direction and you see Whittier right now, you see the back of it or the side of it from most places. I think it would be lovely to see a grand entrance inviting you to, kind of come into the school as opposed to kind of how the current building feels. So I like that it's kind of reoriented it in the other direction. But again, the design, and this is a 2-story design. Schools can be
2-story. We could
3 stories.
Potentially get more
all kinds
acreage
of
around
things.
it by doing a 3-story academic areas, your gyms and those sort of things. But you could look at maybe potentially raising that upper part and coming in, on a, like Jefferson is, the gym around it with that kind of thing.
One of the things that Dr. Knoll mentioned earlier is programmatically, what are the opportunities that come with a revisioned facility for Whittier? And one of the needs that we continue to hear all over for many, many different things is kind of neutral ground for auditorium space. A number of our elementaries, do a larger musical production. We have events that we do that require an auditorium, and sometimes we just run into each other because we have so many things happening. There might be a way to work that into some type of design where you had kind of extra community/school district auditorium space. I think it's maximizing on the history of the neighborhood. I think culturally it's a rich area. There are some things we could do unique to that and performing groups. So, as we look at the facility drives what you can do then programmatically, and we have to do those two things at the same time. So just kind of putting that out there as this is point of opportunity for a few different things that might layer in nicely to this. And if we're going to, depend on a bond to do that, I think having some additional community value like the after-school clubs, like performance spaces, like community enhanced spaces, that's something to think about.
Okay. And I put together a site information summary. So you can kind of look at the acreages of each option, the number of properties that you would need to acquire. So to pull each one of those off and answer any questions on any of them.
Now, I just want to make sure everybody sees clearly kind of that required property number, because I do think that that's a factor. And we're going to have to get more aggressive, whichever one we kind of lock into, of acquiring those properties if we're really going to hold to a timeline, and we're dependent upon other people's decisions for how we do that. And so when we look at kind of the current, past, current, and future housing elements of our city, I think we see some really interesting things. I think if you talk with some of our interior schools, they have seen a decline in population, where others not far away have seen an increase over the course of this last year, with prices that fluctuate with rental properties, with buying versus renting. And then we've seen lots of apartment buildings being built across the city on that east and west side. Yet what we thought would happen at Ben Rifle with, you know, kind of an explosion of people, Principal Hieronymus will tell you that not a lot of kids are coming from those apartments. And so to predict what's going to happen in a given area with current housing, future housing possibilities, what developers may be interested in, what's existing owned by owner occupants versus rentals, it's just kind of an interesting puzzle to put together around this. But if we look at, you know, the pace that we need to kind of continue on with this, if you look at the difference between 39 and 48 and 29, that's something I think that we need to pay attention to and really decide what is it that we want for this facility and the programming, and then how do we go about getting there with an area that's already, you know, occupied. So I always thought when I first came to the district and heard the plan for here, it was like, no, I don't get it, but I do. But if we can make less of an impact in that area for what we do need to acquire, I think that's worthy of thinking about.
I would agree. I think that we need to be very conscious of affordable housing and the convenience of our students to live near their schools. And so when you look at 48 houses, like that's a lot of property. Considering we have, what did you say? We have 7? Did I read? Did I make that
Well,
up?
on that 48 one, we probably don't have it.
Yeah, I mean,
We've acquired how many?
There's about 9, I believe.
and so depending on whether those are in the right spot or not
Yeah.
to the options, but I think it's definitely good kind of food for thought to really think about the opportunities that we have in front of us, but then also being very respectful of the neighborhood and honoring the people who live there, and then incorporating that into the school as well.
Yeah, the beauty of what we've purchased so far, it's all in all of them, so.
And that's been the plan, so that's
Yeah.
not a new concept. But I appreciate Jeff's work on this, because this is a new picture of it that I think is not a bad option and might be helpful in a number of ways. When you think about, we kind of have these 3 options. These aren't the only options, but you know, when we look at the actual land itself, as you pointed out, some of it is, you know, more shelf ready to go than others in terms of grading and kind of current state of affairs there. As you think about it, board members, we're going to talk about this again at another work session. We tried to really be clear about what we've already acquired, what would need to be acquired, what other information would be helpful as we kind of try to keep, you know, scooting this into a clear picture of where you want to go. What would you want from staff and from me for information, or do we just need time to kind of chew on it and then come back to it and whittle it down that way, or how would you like to go about the process?
No. Do you have any specific questions? Any additional information you would want to be able to consider?
Use your mic.
The one thing that's still a little confusing to me, and it's not because it hasn't been presented, I think it's more how it's been presented, but that is what we have already purchased and what we still need to purchase.
You can go back to that
And-
slide.
So that's a little gray for me. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is that I don't know that it does us any good or our city to have purchased properties that we don't have a plan for. And that's getting back to our timeline for Whittier. I think that's really important for that neighborhood. So we're not sitting on houses that is decreasing property value for those not only that neighborhood, but those around that. because we've all got to see what happens, you know, with entities our size and their future plans, but not having a timeline to really move that forward. So, you know, a decade goes by and the neighborhood goes down and we keep acquiring properties because they ran down the property values. That doesn't do any good for our city. So I'm not seeing that here, which is encouraging. But I think to make a, you know, good informed decision, I want to know what we've already purchased, how that fits in, and if we've purchased property and it's not going to be used, what we plan to be proactive in what we do with that property so that we are honoring that particular neighborhood as well as the neighborhoods around there.
Which one do you have a particular one you want to look at? Because
Well, I think just this shows that what we have,
right, and I can.
and I want to just have some assurity that all three of those plans would utilize those properties we've already purchased.
Well, if you look closely in the blue, they're darker, the ones we have.
Okay.
The houses are shaded in the dark, so you can see where they're at. So all those houses fall within that blue, that center blue in this particular one.
But we haven't acquired, some of those we have not acquired yet, correct?
Right.
Okay.
So all the ones that
When we're
show
projecting
that are not
this,
colored, we have not acquired.
yeah, when you can see this better on the actual PowerPoint, when it's projecting, it's less. So we'll get you a printed copy and we'll do it on color copies. There's a joke to that. So then you can see the overlay. Go to that next slide, Jeff. In the blue they're shaded. You can't hardly see it here. So then you can see, but all of them right now fall within a usable space. And so any of these are in that kind of center area. So we're in good shape that way, but to move forward, that's why we do need to lock in, because of just what you said, because we can't sit forever just kind of piecemealing this, because if we're going to try and move ahead with one of these designs, it would just be one on that back lot that we have that would be the only outlier. So whether it's 2 or then go to 3, they're all in that center block. So go to the third option, Jeff, right there. So we're good right now, but if we went to back up to option 3 or 2, if we decided to go to option 2, that's where you add in a whole new block, 2 blocks there that we weren't factoring in. And so we're not recommending this, but we're just saying, should you decide you wanted to do this, that's a whole new ball game for acquiring houses. If we stay with 1 and 3, then we're right on track.
And you can
I don't
see,
want us to sit on and try to go
Right.
to 3 and then sit on all these houses, so we depreciate the property value and then try to buy it and do that kind of a scenario for the neighborhood. But there's also a cost. I mean, we all are being conscientious of the cost, and that's the other piece I'm not seeing. I mean, I can see, you know, and kind of guesstimate that if we're buying more houses, it's gonna. But what the budget looks like, so how each of those fits into the existing budget, and I mean, I just think we're all really conscientious about how we're using those dollars and we're smart about it. But that's, you know, it's hypothetical right now. You can sort of guess which proposal might be more expensive, but how much of our decision making do we want to use and what the cost is and how it fits into our budget.
now the cost for development of the school will be somewhat the same. I mean, it's a property accusation that's going to be the heart. I mean, the one that, and you're going to put, I don't even throw a number out, but you know, double, you know, under one versus the other. You can look at that.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of these houses are somewhat in the same property value range. I mean, they fluctuate a little bit, but when you look at, you're going to have 20 more for option 2. So that's going to be just a factor in relationship, because the property values don't go up and down so greatly over there that you're going to have a $1 million house versus a, you know, $100,000 house.
So that's the tricky part of an existing replacement, as opposed to what the district is used to doing, which is just building brand new in a leveled out cornfield that has been
Yes.
acquired over time. So you're right, it's the cost of purchasing those houses, which we've been factoring in for quite a while, plus then going out for a bond for the cost of a brand-new school. So it's twofold, so you're right. So predicting that and then not waiting too long to acquire those so that you can then go through with the second phase is what we're trying to lock in on, so you're
Yeah.
right.
And that we picked an option that also can speak to the programming that
Right.
needs to come out of
Right.
the facility. So you're doing a good job. I think these are.
I was just gonna ask, is there any sort of a savings, even marginal, by going from like a 2-story to a 3-story building?
Other than land availability that you could expand it, there might be a slight cost, for foundation. So I always say it somewhat washes, but
Okay. I just think, when we've got the smaller acres available in option 3, it almost makes more sense to try to go up versus out so that you still have that same feeling of green space and
Yeah.
kind of space around it.
It'll need to be evaluated when you design it, because the codes change the exiting, change the stair towers. You can't have open stairways like you have, but you could do some tricks where you come down on one and then, have it open for 2 stories and then have your fire stairs on the end. So there's things you can do to minimize, help that, but.
And if we go to 3, let's just say hypothetically, we're not there yet, but you may be able to then add some of those other spaces, because then you're taking up less footprint for the sprawl. And so that's a factor too.
Yep.
And I think you just said something that made me think about it. What I said a little bit earlier, when you envision this space in an existing neighborhood, in a historical neighborhood, just dropping in something that looks like our other middle schools probably doesn't fit that area. So I think that's what we want to be really intentional about, is how do we add value and preserve that look and feel of a Whittier neighborhood and make it something really special that looks like it either has always been there or belongs there or is a new visioned version of a historically valuable kind of a building. And there's lots of examples of that in many places where districts have done that. But this is a unique project.
Yep.
This isn't like every other project our district has done.
This is not going to be a prototype that we'll
Right.
take a canned plan and put here. We're going to design it from scratch, and we'll interject those kind of visions to the architect team that puts it together.
So I'm hearing from Nan and a couple of the other comments made. We'll get you, or we'll post this anyway, but we'll get you a detailed version so you can look at that clearly. You can see it better on the non-printed ones. When you go through those, if you have questions or want some additional clarity about those kind of current blends of properties or the site itself or some what-if questions, just get those to us and then we'll bring that back at the next work session. But I think the printed copies will help with that because you can't see it quite like we hoped we could here. Jeff went to extra measures because we did some overlays and it's hard to envision it, especially if you're not familiar with that area or, just looking at maps. Some of us are better at that than others, and you're really good at it. So then we have to say, how about
I thought I
for
had
us?
the park layout there, but it didn't show up. So, I don't know what happened.
Did you hide it? Is it?
So maybe on my editing, I.
Yeah. So that'll be a next step, and if you think of anything else that we want at the next work session, let us know. Otherwise, a really good start, and we appreciate the extra time it took for Jeff to kind of vision this third option, which I think is worthy.
Yeah. All right. Any other comments? All right. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Second. I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned.
Move your name tag.